Hello, welcome everyone to the 2023 Thomas Paine Birthdate and Proclamation celebration. My name is Margaret Downey and I'm the president of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. We opened the program by showing the names of today's special guests, speakers, and entertainers. A few surprise guests were not listed, but I'll introduce them to you when we begin the question and answer portion of the event. The opening slides were synchronized to the beautiful piano performance of Christine Magallanes-Jones. I requested that she play excerpts from Mozart's Sonata No. 10 because of its connection to the time when Thomas Paine traveled to France in order to secure French assistance for the Revolutionary War effort. Mozart was in France at the same time, so I imagined them meeting each other through their mutual friend, Benjamin Franklin, at some wonderful French soiree. Well, today we're celebrating proclamations, resolutions, and citations that declare June 8th as Thomas Paine Day. We hope you'll be inspired to write your own proclamation and request that your city honor the legacy of Thomas Paine on June 8th, 2023. We're also celebrating the passage of the Thomas Paine Memorial Bill. It was signed into law at the end of December 2022 by President Joe Biden. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association will now begin working with the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission on advancing the project with the goal of unveiling a Thomas Paine monument in 2026. That date coincides with the 250th year anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. Now, to start the formal program, I'm so very proud to welcome the man who made it possible to introduce House Bill 6720 and who was the co-lead on its introduction to the Senate, as well as initiating the eventual signature of the president. Welcome, Congressman Jamie Raskin.
Hey, everybody, it's Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District. So psyched to greet everybody at the Tom Paine Memorial Association Proclamation celebration. Happy birthday, Tom Paine, and all of my warmest greetings to you guys who are celebrating the great man's birthday. We've got a lot to celebrate this year, including the fact that my bill to build a Tom Paine Memorial in Washington, D.C. was signed into law by President Biden on December 29th of last year as part of the omnibus bill, and it has been fully pre-funded with all of your hard work and philanthropy with private contributions. So we are ready to get moving on this thing, which is really exciting. And Tom Paine is being widely recognized in my party. Even some people in the other party talk about him sometimes too, but Tom Paine is making a roaring comeback these days at a time when we need him badly, because the authoritarians and the autocrats and the theocrats and the plutocrats and all of the criminals and bullies of the world are on the march. And so we need the spirit of Tom Paine and his love for democracy and freedom. And that was a love that was so strong that he was a critical figure, not only in the American Revolution, of course, writing Common Sense, the pamphlet that launched the revolution, but also in the French Revolution, and went to aid the movement there against monarchy and the king. And then when the French Revolution turned dark in some different ways, including the move to execute the king, Paine spoke out strongly and said that France should not only be the first nation in Europe to abolish monarchy, it should be the first nation in Europe to abolish the death penalty, capital punishment. And for that, of course, he was thrown into the Bastille and was facing execution. But he made his way out of that close call the way he did so many other times in his life. But the spirit of Tom Paine, the spirit of freedom and democracy and struggle for real civilization is a struggle that continues. And I want to thank you guys all for being part of it. And I want to specifically salute you for the effort to create Tom Paine Days all over the country. And I hope people will be able to observe Tom Paine Day and then come and check out the new Tom Paine Memorial as soon as we get that built in Washington, D.C. So I'm wishing all of you a pensive and reflective and exuberant Tom Paine celebration. And thanks for giving me a minute to say hello.
Well, thank you, Congressman Raskin. It's always a pleasure to host you at our events. Without you, the efforts to honor Thomas Paine's legacy would not have the momentum that we're enjoying today. 4 months ago, House Bill 6720 was endorsed by Congresswoman Victoria Spartz. She not only signed on as a supporter, but Congresswoman Spartz also became a co-lead of the bill. Her leadership role made House Bill 6720 a truly bipartisan effort. Congresswoman Victoria Spartz sent us a video greeting.
It is my honor to be part of the efforts to honor Thomas Paine, the father of the American Revolution. I'd like to share one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Paine. Government, even in its best state, that is a necessary evil, will always remember Thomas Paine and his contribution to our republic.
Thank you, Congresswoman Spartz. Mark Dann, the Freedom from Religion Foundation's Director of Governmental Affairs, was tremendously helpful in scheduling lobby visits during the time we were searching for co-sponsors of House Bill 6720. He helped put together a lobbying team. He set up training sessions, he scheduled lobbying appointments, and arranged for meetings with various monument commissions. Mark is here with us today. Welcome, Mark.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Margaret. It's a pleasure to be here and see so many wonderful friends and to be here with great fans of Thomas Paine. So I want to talk with you a little bit about how we did this. And this was not a given by any stretch of the imagination. So we began talking with Representative Raskin's staff before COVID to build a memorial in Washington, D.C. It's not like a typical city. You don't just simply build a memorial. It requires an act of Congress to be passed, and then and that's kind of the easy part. And we'll talk a little bit maybe more about that in the weeks to come. So folks like Margaret Downey, Dan Barker, Annie Laurie, Zenos and Rosalie Fredakis, Robin Blundner, Andrew Seidel, and great support from the Thomas Paine Memorial Association Board started talking with Raskin's office about how we can do this. And we knew we had to overcome some of our ghosts from the 90s when the memorial was sponsored by Congress and then signed into law. But unfortunately, as we all know, the memorial didn't build. We can't thank our donors enough for fully funding the monument, which started taking away opposition from the memorial as well. But we also were smart, and we realized that the political environment has changed quite a bit since the early 90s. Even things that you think might just be, well, who could possibly disagree with the Thomas Paine Memorial? Well, you'd be surprised. So we never took anyone for granted. We never took anyone's voice for granted. We knew this wasn't an automatic victory. And our whole focus was get the bill on unanimous consent. Unanimous consent is where everybody in Congress agrees on a bill, and it usually moves through a voice vote. It's an easy way to move a bill, and it's non-controversial. But you have to be able to get the bill agreed upon by very liberal people and some very, very conservative people. So we focused like a laser on that objective. And we knew we needed to talk about how Thomas Paine was far from a typical member of the revolutionary generation. We need to be able to answer how Thomas Paine is relevant today and how he relates to our lives. So we knew without being able to do that, we could easily run into trouble and our bill could easily stall. So I can't thank people enough like Gene Jones and Jesse Ramsaran to talk about from a veteran's perspective, Charis Howard, who talked about Thomas Paine from a youth perspective, Aaron Lewis, who talked about Thomas Paine from a women's perspective, Barbara Stocker from a scientific perspective, Mandisa Thomas from an African-American perspective, Peter Coe from a Republican and immigrant perspective, and Kristen Manna and Karen Heineman from a conservative perspective. And they all showed how Thomas Paine is relevant today and for future generations. But that still wasn't a given. So we laser focused on the House Natural Resources Committee and met with over 20 offices. We got bipartisan support with Representative Obernolte from California, and then also Representative Spartz as well. And that helped us move forward and start warming up the committee and moving forward. But that still wasn't a given. As Margaret mentioned, we had to go before the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission to get the approval of the Department of the Interior and the Park Service. And sometimes if bills often run into trouble with opposition from departments, well, we were able to counteract that. NCMAC, the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission, unanimously approved our bill and gave us sterling review. But that still wasn't a given. We got a vote, but it was after the election and we knew time was running short. And thanks so much to Representative Raskin, who was able to get that successful vote. And we did the work to make sure the bill was unanimously approved. He got into the omnibus bill without any objection, and the rest is history, and we're going to make more of it. So thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you to the Thomas Paine Memorial Association Board, and it's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to many more great days with all of you.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. I hope you can stay for the question and answer session. It has been such a pleasure working with you. Before we present the keynote speaker, we are thrilled to introduce an exciting project that sheds a fresh light on George Washington's famous crossing of the Delaware. The Crossing by Jason Huza and John Allen Watts is a new musical that places Thomas Paine and his American crisis front and center. During this event, we will present a total of 3 songs from The Crossing. Here to introduce the first song is John Allen Watts.
Thank you, Margaret. We're so pleased to be a part of this celebration to honor the birthday of Thomas Paine. As Jason and I were creating The Crossing, we never forgot his heroism and contributions to the revolutionary cause. So we're very proud to debut 3 songs from our musical during this wonderful event. The first of these songs, These Are the Days, both opens and closes the show. These Are the Days introduces Thomas Paine and the group of unknowns who wind up in the Durham boat that crossed the Delaware River on that Christmas night in 1776 with General Washington. The second song, On the Wheel of Time, is a duet that takes place between 2 colonial women in Philadelphia who are printing the first edition of The American Crisis. And the third and final song, Rights Intrinsic, is sung by Thomas Paine and showcases his vision for a new world. We hope everyone will stay around to hear it. If you'd like to learn more about The Crossing and how you can help our show come to the public, please visit our website, www.thecrossingmusical.com, and follow us on social media. So please enjoy These Are the Days, an appropriate segue to today's keynote address.
Is this a folly to charge the poor for war's expense? I didn't think so when I wrote down common sense. But all these soldiers, well, they sold a bill of goods. Frozen, shoeless, desperate, abandoned in these woods. I heard we were freemen, not even believing such news the winds could bring. The word from on high, like a sign in the sky, shook the world from the lowest to the king. Marched out of Princeton, convinced in the wisdom of man who we'll never know. Thrown every problem from Gibbs Bay to Harlem, and now we've no place to go. 'Cause suddenly doubt is a factor our leaders we can't quite absolve. And so we awaken with deep desperation as fate tests our tepid resolve. These are the days, these are the moments, these are the times that will try a man's soul.
These are the stakes,
These are the torments, hope and despair vie for who gets control. These are the means, we are the people who haven't forgotten why our fathers came. One congregation, a righteous upheaval, will be remembered but not by our name.
The sunshine soldier, the storybook Tory, men without the vim to win. Followed my father, all 5 of my brothers, anything less would be a sin.
freedom and franchise. Now what would that feel like for people long overdue? If they win their freedom, then maybe they'll see that all men long for it too.
They'll find us now deep in the winter, foes both without and within. It somehow seems clear what is happening here will allow a new world to begin.
These are the days, these are the moments, these are the times that will try a man's soul. These are the stakes, these are the torments, hope and despair vie for who gets control.
These are the means, we are the people who haven't forgotten why our mothers came. One congregation,
A righteous upheaval will be remembered, but not by our name.
Our cause is just, and in that fact I trust. It's self-evident, Jefferson said. Though we are right and won't shy from a fight, is it pride to be right and be dead?
These ongoing wars and the settling of scores, a tradition firmly affixed.
though often told stories of England's past glories, I'm glad for the ocean betwixt.
Then suddenly they're on our doorstep, England blood red for their part. And I'd love nothing more than to give 'em what for, if our leaders would lead us with heart. These are the days, these are the moments, these are the times that will try a man's soul. These are the stakes, these are the torments, hope and despair vie for who gets control. These are the means, we are the people who haven't forgotten why our fathers came. One congregation, a righteous upheaval, will be remembered. Will be remembered. Will be remembered. Will be remembered, but not by our name.
Well, that was fantastic. I can hardly wait for the musical to be produced. Audience members can follow the progress of the production of The Crossing through a link that I put in the chat. Another song will be presented soon, and we will close the event with a very special third edition from The Crossing. Joining us live from London, England, is Greg Claeys. He is a Professor Emeritus of History at the University of London. The title of Greg's speech is Thomas Paine's Collected Works, a new edition. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you so much, Margaret, and thanks to the Thomas Paine Memorial Association for inviting me to speak briefly today, and to all of you for coming along for this memorable occasion, which has been celebrated for at least 200 years on both sides of the Atlantic. Firstly, as ceremony dictates, let me wish a warm and heartfelt happy birthday to the man whose first appearance in the world on 29 January 1736 at Thetford, Norfolk, where a statue of him looks down on passers-by today, we commemorate now. Hurrah! And 3 cheers. I'm sorry, it's difficult to convey my enthusiasm on Zoom. As you all know, Thomas Paine is, of course, the founding father who never was, the bad boy of the American struggle against British rule over the colonists. First a hero, present at many levels at the Declaration of Independence and during the Revolutionary War, when his American Crisis articles did so much to rally American public opinion, and then, because of his deist views and his denial that the Bible was a work of divine revelation, a much excoriated, even hated man in his later years. He has too often been written out of the historical narrative as an atheist, which he was not, as well as in the company of more genteel political reformers, a radical egalitarian and plebeian rabble-rouser, or worse, which he was. Today we recognize him, however, as a writer whose key role in instigating the American colonies' break from Britain was widely recognized. His close association with Franklin, Jefferson, Washington has often been acknowledged. His participation in British radical reform movements, Republican campaigns against monarchy and aristocracy, and key events in the French Revolution are well known. His insistence that oligarchical concentrations of wealth needed to be limited was timely indeed, and remains so. Paine's writings include, of course, such internationally famous works as Common Sense of 1776, the pamphlet which more than any other convinced the colonists of the need for complete independence from the mother country. Then there's Rights of Man of 1791-92, usually regarded as a foundational text in rights-centered radical and liberal political thought, and still regarded as a robust rebuttal of the arguments of another foundational text, this time of modern conservatism, Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France. Elected to the French National Assembly, Paine nearly lost his head during Robespierre's reign of terror, chiefly for having championed the unpopular cause of defending the French monarch, Louis XVI, from the death penalty. He was unsuccessful, of course. Paine was also active as an engineer and scientist, corresponded with many key figures in both the American and French revolutions, and did much to foment the cause of radical political reform, which then meant chiefly extending the franchise in Britain. He was, in fact, one of the most remarkable figures of the entire revolutionary epoch, and the only person to play a major role in political movements in America, Britain, and France. His pioneering secularist outlook has provided generations of skeptics with inspiration, and his withering criticisms of the absurdity of hereditary legislators being, I quote from Rights of Man, as inconsistent as that of hereditary judges or hereditary juries, and as absurd as an hereditary mathematician or an hereditary wise man, and as ridiculous as an hereditary poet laureate. All this retains great relevance still. Besides acknowledging Paine's rightful place in the history of the revolutionary epoch and celebrating his achievements, I want today to speak briefly about a new edition of his writings, which is in preparation and which will hopefully be published by Princeton University Press in the spring of 2026, just as we've heard, in time for the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution later that year. You'll all be aware of several standard editions of Paine's writings, the first edited under difficult wartime conditions by Philip Foner, published in 2 volumes in 1945. That's what most people refer to today. Some of you may also recall Moncur Conway's earlier, equally pioneering edition in its own time of 1894. Neither of these editions, however, though each advanced Paine's studies some distance, particularly Foner, of course, is appropriate to the demands of modern scholars. The occasion of the present project has been provided by a generous grant from the Nimick Foundation, which has allowed the formation of an editorial board of 5 persons beside myself as editor-in-chief, namely Gary Burton, who I'm very pleased to see here this evening, of the Thomas Paine National Historical Association, and Scott Cleary of Iona College here in the US, Marc Belissa of the University of Paris Nanterre, Yannick Bose of the University of Rouen, and Karine Lunici, also of University of Rouen in France. We also have an expert advisory board, which includes a number of leading Paine experts, as well as specialists in the arduous task of editing late 18th century text. Our collaborative project has resulted in the location of more than 180 new letters, and we will additionally publish in full the texts of many other letters previously only partially printed. The new letters include letters to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Georges Danton, the Vicomte de Barras, Edmund Burke, and Napoleon Bonaparte. We've also been able to identify a substantial number of new Paine writings. Here we have built upon the work of Richard Gimbel, whose prized collection of Painiana was deposited with the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, to whom we are also much indebted. And beyond this, to the additional scholarship of Alice Berry. Between them, Gimbel and Berry identified some 155 items not printed in Foner's edition. In some 400 writings by Paine will be published which have never been reprinted. The proposed project will provide an edition which will nearly double the number of Paine's letters in print and substantially expand the number of his writings currently available. Many of these new works originally appeared in American periodicals in the 1770s and 1780s. They include contributions from the Pennsylvania Evening Post, the Pennsylvania Packet, the Pennsylvania Gazette, and the American Citizen. In France, new contributions by Paine to the journals Le Bien Informé and Le Républicain have also been identified. Some 17 fully established new works can now be added from Paine's French period, plus some new correspondence from this period. Many interesting discoveries have also been made respecting Paine's writings prior to his emigration to the North American colonies in 1774. It had, or perhaps I should still say, still remains, something of a mystery as to how Paine, who supposedly had written only one brief pamphlet published anonymously in 1774 on the harsh conditions suffered by English excise officers, managed to write the astonishing pamphlet, Common Sense, which has a polished and mature style much more suited to a seasoned political veteran. And indeed, we do now know that Paine was frequently employed as a ghost or hack political writer by the opposition from the late 1750s, and particularly during the 1760s and early 1770s, being earliest championed by the elder William Pitt. In this role, he rubbed shoulders, not necessarily directly physically, but he was acquainted with some of them, with many other prominent, much more prominent public oppositional figures, including Edmund Burke, Richard Price, and James Burr. Paine participated also in the famous Junius controversy, and as a true or real Whig, polished his style for more than a decade. So he was an accomplished writer well before Common Sense was published. The identification of many of these early works would not have been possible without a breakthrough in the scientific analysis of anonymous and pseudonymous texts, which were extremely common in the middle and late 18th century, owing to the severe penalties occasioned by being prosecuted by the government for notionally treasonable writing. Here, the project has benefited enormously from the text attribution software developed by Gary Burton and Scott Cleary. This computerized textual analysis boasts an accuracy rate of above 90%. The attribution software is a three-pronged multidisciplinary approach. First, a computation is made from the software to get a probability of authorship. Then the content of the work is analyzed for philosophical, political concepts and themes in order to categorize the worldview of the document's author. Next, the context in which the document is produced, where it was written, the vehicle for publication, the time frame in which it was written, is considered as supporting or contrary evidence to the author suggested by the text analysis program. This 3C approach, as Gary's called it, assures the results of the computer program and the expertise of scholars are both taken into consideration when determining the authorship of any document. Besides offering new texts, the edition will also propose that some hitherto long-established works should be de-attributed. There are about 26 of Paine's writings in this category, including such famous pieces as African Slavery in America, upon which Paine's anti-slavery credentials are often based, and an occasional letter on the female sex, which has played a similar role in relation to his proto-feminist ideals. I hasten to add, however, that other works still substantiate his reformist views in both areas. Many other works signed Common Sense and accordingly attributed to Paine have also been removed from his canon. At about 1.5 million words, the Princeton edition of Paine's collected writings thus promises to offer some penetrating new views on Paine's work, his intellectual progress, and his connections. It will be by far the most comprehensive edition of Paine's writings. We hope it will go some way towards restoring Paine's reputation as a writer and actor of the first rank during the revolutionary epoch. By then, we will have celebrated several more Paine birthdays. But as presents go, we hope this one will serve its purpose admirably for some time to come. So once again, happy birthday, Thomas Paine, and may your radiant enthusiasm for protecting the cause of the common person, and particularly the poor, never dim. And once again, congratulations to the Thomas Paine Memorial Association for their persevering efforts to ensure that a statue is erected to bring once again recognition of Paine's efforts to a wider audience. I'm not able, unfortunately, to stay for the Q&A, but there are some excellent scholars present here today, closer to you in terms of time zones, who will no doubt be able to answer all your questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Greg. We really look forward to seeing the final collected works of Thomas Paine. Now, in a moment, we will be meeting board members of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association as they highlight Thomas Paine Day proclamations, resolutions, and citations that honor the legacy and work of Thomas Paine. You might wonder why Thomas Paine Day is officially recognized on June 8th, which is the date of his death, instead of January 29th, the date of his birth. The reason is that in Europe, the traditional time to reflect on someone's life and accomplishments is when they die. Honoring Thomas Paine legacy on June 8th helps us coordinate with celebrations that take place in England and France. Also, the weather in June is much more amenable to outdoor activities. The first proclamation presenter is Professor Christopher Cameron. He is reading a 2014 City of Philadelphia Thomas Paine Day proclamation that was signed by Michael A. Nutter, who was the mayor of Philadelphia at the time. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm very happy to be here and honored to be reading Mayor Nutter's proclamation announcing Thomas Paine Day in 2014. I chose this proclamation for two main reasons. The first is simply my admiration for Mayor Nutter's leadership. He was mayor during the Great Recession, and unlike a lot of major cities, actually saw Philadelphia's credit rating upgraded, showing me he was an effective mayor and someone who can get things done under difficult circumstances. I greatly admire his leadership and his support for honoring one of our most important leaders in revolutionary America. The second reason I chose this was because I felt that for a one-page proclamation, it was incredibly thorough in not only listing Paine's key publications, but also contextualizing his accomplishments and explaining their importance to our history. I also really appreciate that Mayor Nutter did not gloss over The Age of Reason as among Paine's most important books. Now to the proclamation itself. The city of Philadelphia holds a singular place in the founding history of America. Our country's founding fathers gave life to a new system of democracy in Philadelphia that continues to serve as a beacon on the path to freedom and independence throughout the world. Looking back to Philadelphia's colonial past, it is important to acknowledge that our founding fathers were strongly influenced by the thoughts, speeches, and writings of one of the most outspoken of their peers, Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine came to Philadelphia, then the political and cultural center of America, in 1774 after making acquaintance of Benjamin Franklin while in London. Shortly after arriving here, he became the editor of the Pennsylvania Magazine and began publishing essays against the practice of slavery that pointed out the immorality of advocating for American freedom and independence while allowing humans to be sold. Thomas Paine was one of the first members of the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society. Thomas Paine described a new political philosophy in his 1775 pamphlet, Common Sense. This publication was the first time that a democracy by and for the people was mentioned. It sent out a call for citizens to take control of their country and their destinies. Throughout the Revolutionary War, Paine continued to write stirring essays such as The American Crisis, written in December 1776, encouraging people to stay the course of freedom and continue in the struggle for independence. In later years, his Rights of Man and the Age of Reason inspired people throughout the world to strive for political, economic, and social advances while calling for economic and social reforms. Thomas Paine's writings acknowledge that freedom depends on people who form opinions based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or previously established beliefs. His final work, Agrarian Justice, written in 1795, dealt with problems caused by poverty and the inequitable distribution of property, and laid the groundwork for tax reforms and fair employment practices that were introduced in later years. Thomas Paine died on June 8, 1809. On June 8, 1994, the first Thomas Paine Day was declared in the city of Philadelphia. June 8, 2014 marks the 20th anniversary of Thomas Paine Day in our city. Therefore, I, Michael A. Nutter, Mayor of the City of Philadelphia, do hereby proclaim Sunday, June 8, 2014, to be Thomas Paine Day, 20th anniversary in Philadelphia, and urge all citizens to join in this celebration by honoring the memory of Thomas Paine by participating in the commemorative events and activities taking place, and give thoughtful recognition to his contributions to establish the precious American freedom and democracy that we flourish under today. Michael A. Nutter, Mayor, given under my hand and the seal of the City of Philadelphia on this 8th day of June, 2014. Thank you very much for providing me with this proclamation to read, Margaret, as well as for your leadership of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association.
Oh, thank you, Christopher. My pleasure. You did a wonderful job presenting Mayor Nutter's words. Thank you so much. Let's continue to explore other Pennsylvania-related proclamations. Thomas Paine Memorial Association board member Andrian is presenting a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Thomas Paine Day proclamation that was passed by the House of Representatives in 2018. Welcome, Anne. So nice to see you.
Margaret, it's always great to be with you, and thank you for your leadership in this wonderful celebration of someone who is truly great. It's always striking to me that the democracy that we aspire to and that we have achieved in some measure would be completely unrecognizable to the founding fathers, with this one glaring exception of Thomas Paine. We need make no excuses for him. We need never cringe when we read his writings, because he was so prescient, so prophetic about what America could be. He's also an inventor, not only of the dream of America, but also the voice, the American voice, because he pioneers the writing for the public, not just for one class, not just for one group that has been highly educated in the history and the language of Greece and Rome, but instead a kind of writing which is the way we talk to each other when we're in the room with another person, wanting to be understood, not ever wanting to impress with our erudite knowledge, but to be understood and to melt that frozen sea inside us that keeps us from acting on to right the things we know that are wrong. And so for me, Thomas Paine is the genius inventor of what America could be and what it still can be if we do our work. And so I'm thrilled and honored to be part of this and to read a proclamation from the House of Representatives, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Office of the Speaker in the House, May 23, 2018. Whereas Thomas Paine, a founding father and leader of the American Revolution, peer of George Washington, James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, was one of the most brilliant political philosophers of his time. And whereas Thomas Paine published a pamphlet entitled Common Sense, setting forth his argument in favor of American independence and supported the American Revolution through personal service, his fortune, and his drafting of the American Crisis. And whereas Thomas Paine was an early proponent of universal and equal education for male and female children, equality for women, religious freedom, and he suggested an alliance of neutral countries in conflicts between nations. And whereas his life and work continue to inspire individuals who seek liberty and democracy throughout the world, therefore, be it resolved that the House of Representatives designate June 8, 2018 as the first annual Thomas Paine Day in Pennsylvania, and be it further resolved that the House of Representatives urge the residents of this Commonwealth to take note of this day in honor of Thomas Paine and his accomplishments. And that's the resolution. Margaret, do you have any other resolutions from Pennsylvania?
Well, yes, we do, Anne. Thank you. And thanks for that wonderful, passionate reading of that particular citation and proclamation. We have a few more proclamations from Pennsylvania, since so much of Thomas Paine's early work was done in and around Philadelphia. Board member Julia Sweeney is with us to share some of her thoughts about Thomas Paine and to read a 1999 City of Philadelphia Thomas Paine proclamation signed by Ed Rendell when he was mayor. Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia Sweeney, and I am so proud to be a board member of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, which is seeking to establish a monument to Thomas Paine in Washington, D.C. And I'm just so excited to be part of this. I'm going to read a proclamation from the city of Philadelphia. And in that proclamation, it names June 8th Thomas Paine Day. And the reason why it's June 8th is because that's the day he died. And there's a story about Thomas Paine's death that I love. He was apparently on his deathbed, and he was well known for being a deist, which means that he was not a Christian, but he believed in nature's God. And the physician who was attending to him came to him and said, "Would you like to accept Jesus Christ before you die?" And he said, "I have no wish to believe on that subject." I love that so much. It's so polite. He didn't say bugger off like I would have said. He said, "I have no wish to believe on that subject." And then he died. That was the last thing he said. And just polite and kind to the end. Now, I personally believe that the Revolutionary War would not have been won without Thomas Paine's wildly popular 47-page pamphlet, Common Sense, where he argued that we were in a situation where we had the chance to create something new in the world, a democracy, a republic of elected officials by the people who were accountable and who could represent the common good of all and could protect the powerless from the powerful. And he wrote so clearly and concisely and beautifully and inspiringly and passionately that he ignited the colonists to fight to the death to get it. And I don't think if you have that, I think if you take it away, we don't win the Revolutionary War and we don't become independent. We would be part of the British Commonwealth now. And where would we be? I mean, well, maybe we'd have universal health care, and we might have ended slavery 30 years earlier. And maybe we have some sensible gun control laws. For example, last year in England, 35 people died of gunshot wounds, but in the US, it's 45,000 people died of gunshot wounds. Now, I know what you're thinking, Julia, that's not fair. England is tiny, the US is big, and that's true. The US's population is 6 times that of England, so 6 times 35, I guess it would be 210 people dying of gunshot wounds compared to 45,000. But actually, that isn't fair, because Thomas Paine did more than just inspire the colonists in America. After the Revolutionary War, he hightailed it to France and inspired the people who took on the French Revolution. And while we know there was a lot of ups and downs, that really started liberal democracy. I mean, those ideas infected all of Western Europe, including England. And I would say their sensible gun laws and their universal health care and the abolishment of slavery in England are partly due to Thomas Paine. So even though he was from England and he couldn't get any traction there, he ended up affecting his own country in the end anyway. And so I personally have to say, I'm glad we won the Revolutionary War. I mean, we have to be us. Where would Meghan and Harry go if they didn't have the US to go to? Okay, my favorite part of Common Sense is when Thomas Paine writes, we have every opportunity and every encouragement before us to form the noblest and purest constitution on the face of the earth. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. To begin the world over again. I love that so much. Who doesn't fantasize that? And we kind of did do that. And it's really a lot because of Thomas Paine. Now, I think Thomas Paine is relevant now because if you're paying attention at all, it is absolutely clear that the crisis of our time right now is the resurgence of neo-fascist right-wing authoritarianism. And I'm not just talking about the United States, I'm talking about it globally. And I don't know how it's going to turn out. And it's internationally financed from deep, deep, rich pockets. And I think if Thomas Paine were alive today, he would say, let's get to work. Okay, I'm going to read this proclamation. The City of Philadelphia Proclamation. History reveals that Thomas Paine did a major portion of his great literary work in Pennsylvania, primarily in Philadelphia. Thomas Paine inspired the Declaration of Independence and the birth of this nation by writing landmark documents such as Common Sense and The Crisis. The writings of Thomas Paine inspired people throughout the world to strive for political, economic, and social advancement. Those aforementioned advancements can be found in Thomas Paine's Agrarian Justice, Dissertations on Government, The Affairs of the Bank, and Paper Money. Thomas Paine is duly noted as having been one of the first to call for the end of slavery and the establishment of human rights around the world, as evidenced by his thought-provoking works, African Slavery in America, The Age of Reason, and Justice for Women. The writings of Thomas Paine acknowledge that freedom depends on people who form opinions based on reason, independently of tradition, authority, or established belief. On July 14th, 1780, the University of Pennsylvania awarded Thomas Paine an honorary MA degree. The Thomas Paine Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, located in Eagleville, Pennsylvania, is named to honor the legacy of Thomas Paine. Therefore, I, Edward G. Rendell, Mayor of the City of Philadelphia, do hereby proclaim that June 8th, 1999 is the 5th annual Thomas Paine Day. We ask citizens to join in this celebration by honoring his memory with special events, parades, rallies, and thoughtful recognition. All citizens are encouraged to learn more about this great historic figure. Edward G. Rendell, Mayor, given under my hand and the seal of the City of Philadelphia, this 8th day of June, 1999. Now, Margaret, the proclamation I just read mentions that citizens should hold special events, parades, and rallies, and thoughtful events. Did any of these things actually take place in Philadelphia?
Yes, Julia, thanks for asking. And thank you for that wonderful presentation. In 1994, the Philadelphia City Council also recognized Thomas Paine Day by passing a resolution. It's right here. And that resolution states, whereas City Council has enacted legislation to rename Rayburn Plaza as Thomas Paine Plaza and to rename that part of Chancellor Street between Dock Street and 3rd Street as Thomas Paine Place. And whereas Thomas Paine inspired the Declaration of Independence and the birth of this nation by his landmark documents, Common Sense and the American Crisis. And whereas in 1780, he wrote the Pennsylvania state law for the abolition of slavery, the first anti-slavery law in this country. And whereas Thomas Paine advocated justice for women, public education, progressive tax laws, religious freedom, and the preservation of world peace through the arbitration of international disputes. And whereas his life and work have inspired many generations of democratic thinkers in many lands. And whereas Thomas Paine died on June 8, 1809, and June 8th is a date to honor the life and accomplishments of Thomas Paine. Therefore, the city of Philadelphia hereby declares June 8, 1994, to be the first annual Thomas Paine Day. The resolution was signed by John Street, the president of City Council. In 1996, John Street also signed a Philadelphia City Council citation announcing that the Thomas Paine Plaza was approved and would formally open. We have that right here too. And that was the year I organized a very special June 8th event. The event took place in the newly named Thomas Paine Plaza. Activities included speeches from members of the City Council, a Thomas Paine Day proclamation ceremony, various presentations from local notables, and a parade that included a portrayal of Benjamin Franklin, a flag bearer, a fife player, and a drummer. The Thomas Paine Elementary School, located in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, sent several busloads of children and teachers to the plaza. They participated in the parade, carrying signs and homemade fans. Now, speaking of Cherry Hill, I've asked Thomas Paine Memorial Association board member Francis Chu to read a 1997 Thomas Paine Day proclamation signed by the mayor of Cherry Hill. Welcome, Francis.
Thank you, Margaret. It is a true pleasure for me to take part in the celebration for Thomas Paine. One of the reasons I chose a Cherry Hill proclamation was simply because I admired the fact that Cherry Hill has an elementary school named after Thomas Paine, and that this school has a mission for instilling the values of respect, responsibility, resilience, and active citizenship. I also admired the message of the Cherry Hill Proclamation itself, with its emphasis on so many of the great ideas we associate with Paine today, namely his resistance against hereditary government, slavery, and colonization, as well as his concern for public welfare, including that of the poor and elderly. This was a man who was clearly light years ahead of his time. Here's the proclamation. Whereas it is the intention of the mayor and council of Cherry Hill Township to focus attention on noteworthy occasions, and whereas Thomas Paine, sensing the spirit of rebellion in the colonies and objecting to a government that imposed its will upon an unrepresented group of people, formulated his ideas on American independence in the pamphlet Common Sense. And whereas Common Sense sold over 500,000 copies virtually overnight, and won its author a place in history as an outspoken advocate against arbitrary government, poverty, illiteracy, and unemployment, and for the rights of people. And whereas Paine's combined writings were a key factor in mobilizing colonist support for independence from Britain and helped convince the members of the Continental Congress to place their signatures at the bottom of the Declaration of Independence. And whereas in celebration of the 4th annual Thomas Paine weekend, a life-size statue of Paine will be unveiled in Bordentown, New Jersey, and public celebrations will be held in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And whereas a live performance of Thomas Paine, Let Them Call Me Rebel, will be presented at the Thomas Paine Elementary School in Cherry Hill to teach children the history of the man who helped create our nation. Now, therefore, I, Susan Bass Levin, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the Township of Cherry Hill, County of Camden, State of New Jersey, do hereby proclaim June the 6th through 8th, 1997 as Thomas Paine Days, and do urge all citizens to join with me and the council in honoring the memory of this great patriot. The 1997 Cherry Hill Proclamation mentioned that a life-size statue of Thomas Paine was unveiled in Bordentown, New Jersey that year. Was there a Thomas Paine Day proclamation written for Bordentown, Margaret?
Yes, thanks for noticing that, Francis. We'll get to the Bordentown, New Jersey proclamation in a minute, but first I want everyone to know that Francis is the author of a book that I often recommend. She wrote the Routledge Guidebook to Paine's Rights of Man. It's an excellent resource for Thomas Paine enthusiasts. Now, Robin Blumner, the Vice President of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, will read the Bordentown, New Jersey proclamation. Welcome, Robin.
Thanks, Margaret. There is indeed a life-size statue of Thomas Paine located in Bordentown, New Jersey. The 1996 City of Bordentown Proclamation explains why the statue is located there. City of Bordentown Proclamation. Whereas Thomas Paine considered the city of Bordentown his home, residing here off and on between 1776 and 1804, and whereas Thomas Paine invented the single-span iron bridge to span the Schuylkill River while living in Bordentown, and whereas Thomas Paine took a 3-foot model of the bridge to Philadelphia and set it up in Ben Franklin's garden on Market Street, and whereas Thomas Paine died on June 8, 1809, and June 8th is the date that many cities in Pennsylvania honor the life and accomplishments of Thomas Paine. And whereas the city of Bordentown joins the city of Philadelphia, the city of York, and the city of Lancaster to pay tribute to Thomas Paine. Now, therefore, we, Mayor Zygmunt Tagarnsky, Deputy Mayor Joseph R. Malone III, and Commissioner James E. Lynch Jr., do hereby join together proclaiming June 8, 1996, to be another Thomas Paine Day in Bordentown, and urge all citizens to join in this celebration by honoring his memory with special celebrations, parades, rallies, and thoughtful recognition. All citizens are encouraged to learn more about this great historical figure, dated this 8th day of June, 1996. Thomas Paine was given a farm and cottage in New Rochelle, New York, as a thank you gift for his service to his country. He allowed Madame Bonneville and her sons to reside in Bordentown, and he moved to the New Rochelle location. Here to present a New Rochelle Thomas Paine Day proclamation is board member Ian Raskin.
Thank you, Robin. Now, unlike the previous proclamations, the one I'm going to read has not yet been approved, because when we were collecting these proclamations for this event, we found that the one written in 1996 for New Rochelle, New York, was full of errors. So Gary Burton, a former board member of our association, wrote a new proclamation for New Rochelle, New York, and it's been presented to the office of the mayor, Noam Branson. So I'm going to read the words of Gary's submission. Whereas Thomas Paine received from the state of New York in 1784 a 300-acre farm on North Avenue in New Rochelle for his services in the Revolution. And whereas he lived on what is now Paine Avenue for 2 years on his farm between 1804 and 1806, and whereas he was the spark that lit the fuse of revolution with his work Common Sense in January 1776, and closed 1776 with the essay that turned the tide in the favor of the American forces with his Crisis One, and whereas he wrote Rights of Man, which became the Bible of the age of democratic revolutions around the world, and whereas he demonstrated how equality is the basis of democracy and just government, fought for the abolition of slavery, and was the first to call for reparations, and whereas New Rochelle has become the world center for scholarship, remembrance, and appreciation of Thomas Paine's life, works, and legacy with the creation of the Thomas Paine New Rochelle Center, therefore, we recognize Thomas Paine's contributions to democracy and human rights by declaring that his death day of June 8th be known as Thomas Paine Day in New Rochelle, New York, as of June 8th, 2023, 214 years after his death, and henceforth. And when the proclamation is authorized and recognized, as we hope it will be, we will announce it with great fanfare. Now, I just want to point out that note that Paine only lived on the farm for 2 years. Now, it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, that when New York State gave him this cottage and farm, he said, thank you very much, but I really would prefer to live in New York City. If this is true, it's so Thomas Paine. And I'm here because I have a one-man play that I wrote and performed about Paine. I've performed it across America, in England. We're going to do a European tour in the autumn. And I've done 3 performances in New Rochelle, which is why I wanted to read their proclamation, not realizing it was full of errors. But I want to say that whenever I perform the play, I am inspired, as the audience is inspired by this story. The story of this extraordinary man and the vision and the extraordinary life that he lived. It has changed my life. So, having said that, I would now like to turn the program over to Annie Laurie Gaylor, who is our secretary, and she is going to read a proclamation from Urbana, Illinois. So, welcome, Annie Laurie.
Thank you, Ian. And happy birthday, Thomas Paine. The world was certainly your country, all men and women your brethren and sisters, and doing good was your only religion, and you did so much good. I'm honored to read the proclamation given by the mayor of the city of Urbana, Illinois in 2009. Champaign-Urbana, which are sister cities, holds a special place in state church and Freethought history. Champaign was the home of champion of the First Amendment, Vashti McCullum. She brought and won the first case before the Supreme Court, ruling that religious instruction and indoctrination in our public schools is unconstitutional. Her brave legal battle resulted in the decision, the landmark decision, McCullum versus Board of Education in 1948, upon which rests the subsequent great rulings by former Supreme Courts against prayer, devotions, and other religious rituals being imposed upon a captive audience of school children. Vashti took this case on behalf of her sons, and she knew that public schools exist to educate, not indoctrinate. In the meantime, they became persona non grata in their own neighborhoods, schools, and community, and it was not an easy challenge. And by the way, it was a triumph when one of her sons, Daniel McCullum, became mayor of Champaign from 1987 to 1999. Both Daniel and especially his brother, Jim McCullum, who was the main child involved in the case, endured persecution as young children. I am very proud that the late Vashti McCullum was an honorary director and that Dan and Jim are both lifetime members of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Thomas Paine would have saluted them. And now I will read the proclamation by the mayor of the city of Urbana, Illinois. Whereas the Thomas Paine Elementary School, located in Urbana, Illinois, is named after the great patriot Thomas Paine. Whereas on October 28, 2009, students and teachers of the Thomas Paine Elementary School will host Margaret Downey, a representative of the Thomas Paine Foundation, in order to learn more about Thomas Paine. Whereas in October 1775, Thomas Paine began to write his pamphlet, Common Sense, in defense of breaking away from the British Empire, thus inspiring the birth of the United States of America. Whereas on October 29, 1782, Thomas Paine published The Crisis Number 12. Whereas in October 1792, he helped to draft the new French Constitution. Whereas in 1795, the second half of Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason was published. Whereas Thomas Paine returned to America from France on October 30th, 1802, and the writings of Thomas Paine acknowledge that freedom depends on people who form opinions based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or prescribed dogmas. And whereas the writings of Thomas Paine inspired people throughout the world to strive for political, economic, and social advance. And whereas Thomas Paine is duly noted as being one of the first to call for an end to slavery and the establishment of human rights around the world. And whereas it is fitting that the date, October 28th, will be a day to honor the life and accomplishments of Thomas Paine. Now, therefore, I, Laurel Lund Pressing, Mayor of the City of Urbana, Illinois, do hereby proclaim October 28th, 2009 as Thomas Paine Day and ask citizens to join in this celebration by honoring his memory with special events and thoughtful recognition. All citizens are encouraged to learn more about this great historical figure. Now, in this proclamation, you may have noticed that it celebrated Thomas Paine Day on October 28th instead of January 29th, his birth date, or June 8th, his date of death. While we could proclaim every day of the year to be Thomas Paine Day, but in this case, the mayor altered the date to make note that Margaret Downey conducted that Thomas Paine Assembly at the Thomas Paine Elementary School in Urbana. And that date, Mayor Laurel Lund Pressing, former Illinois State Representative, presented the proclamation to the school, and the entire City Council of Urbana was in attendance. And Margaret, I think you are the only Thomas Paine Memorial Board member to ever be mentioned in an official city proclamation. Congratulations.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was certainly a day to remember. And thank you, Annie Laurie. It was such an honor to be named in that proclamation. And that proclamation actually inspired me to continue my work. And we've come a long way since we officially unveiled the Thomas Paine Plaza in 1994. The last two proclamations to be read are from the city of Lancaster and the city of York, Pennsylvania. They were written and presented during a Thomas Paine Day dinner in 1996. Since Lancaster and York are geographically located next to each other, we thought it would be fitting to have the proclamations read by two board members who happen to be husband and wife, and who happen to be sitting next to each other in the living room of their beautiful home. I'm very pleased to welcome John Delancey and Marnie Mossaman Delancey.
The City of York, Pennsylvania Proclamation. Whereas Thomas Paine resided in the city of York during the spring and summer of 1778, and whereas the Continental Congress established its headquarters in York, and whereas Thomas Paine was appointed by the Continental Congress to the position of Secretary to the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and whereas Thomas Paine wrote Supernumerary 1 during his stay in York, and whereas Thomas Paine is duly noted as having been one of the first to call for an end to slavery and the establishment of human rights around the world, and whereas Thomas Paine died on June 8, 1809, and June 8th is the date to honor the life and accomplishments of Thomas Paine, now therefore I, Charles H. Robertson, Mayor of the city of York, Pennsylvania, do hereby proclaim June 8, 1996 to be the second annual Thomas Paine Day in York, and urge all citizens to join in this celebration by honoring his memory with special celebrations, parades, rallies, and thoughtful recognition. All citizens are encouraged to learn more about this great historical figure. Given under my hand and the seal of the city of York this 8th day of June in the year of our Lord 1996. Charles H. Robertson, Mayor.
City of Lancaster Proclamation, Thomas Paine Day, June 8, 1996. Whereas Thomas Paine resided in the city of Lancaster during the late autumn of 1777 and the early spring of 1778, and whereas Lancaster resident Colonel William Henry opened his home to Thomas Paine during a crucial time of the American Revolution, and whereas Thomas Paine wrote The Crisis No. 5, which was published in Lancaster in 1778, while living in the home of Colonel Henry, and whereas The Crisis No. 5 is considered to have effectively revived American troops, salvaged General Washington's command, and thus saved the revolution. And whereas Thomas Paine died on June 8, 1809, and June 8th is the date to honor the life and accomplishments of Thomas Paine, now, therefore, I, Janice C. Stork, Mayor of the City of Lancaster, do hereby proclaim June 8th to be Thomas Paine Day in the City of Lancaster, and urge all citizens to join in honoring his memory and learning more about this great historical figure. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of this city to be affixed. Janice C. Stork, Mayor, June 8, 1996.
Hip hip hooray!
Hey!
Hip hip hooray!
Hip hip hooray!
Well, it's really nice to be involved in this project. There's no question about it. A great man, and to be able to bring new people, a whole new generation to understand where some of our ideas come from, the ideas that made this country terrific and great.
And it's interesting how this proclamation, both of them, say, urge everyone to learn more about Thomas Paine. That was almost 25 years, more than 25 years ago. And still, I think
it can always be, it's always helpful. And I think this monument is going to go a long way in doing that.
Yeah.
You might not know this, my dear.
There's a lot of things I don't know.
I played Thomas Paine.
Oh my God.
Yes, I just remembered. Honestly, I just remembered that just as we were getting ready to do this. I played Thomas Paine probably 50 years ago.
Wow.
Yes, in college. It was one of the first plays I did in college.
Interesting. Were you any good?
But
it was a good role for you because you love words.
Well, somebody thought it was a good role.
Yeah,
I hope I did a good job.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did. Yeah.
Well, let's all celebrate Thomas Paine. Cheers.
Cheers.
And cheers to you, John and Marnie. Before we discuss how audience members can create a proclamation, we present the second song from the new musical, The Crossing. The title of this song is On the Wheel of Time. In the Crossing musical, this song is performed by the characters Elizabeth and Abigail. Tonight, actors Katie Dixon and Tess Primack will be singing the duo.
We are as leaves on trees, a drop on the ashen seas, a night in an infinite desert, blades on a verdant plain, a patchwork on counterpane, a starfield expanding forever and ever. Future begets the past, our lives not meant to last. We're not but cognizant cogs on the wheel of time. Ships landing on the shore for warfare forevermore. Odd how the past forms a pattern. Round and around it goes. Rivalries none of us chose. Ceaseless as rings circling Saturn. Future begets the past. Our lives not meant to last. We're not but cognizant cogs on the wheel of time. Keep rushing on, keep rushing on, keep moving on, keep moving on, keep pressing on, keep pressing on, keep running on, keep running on, keep rushing on, keep rushing on, keep moving on, keep moving on, keep pressing on, keep pressing on, keep running on, keep running on.
Well, that was lovely. To learn more about the musical The Crossing, please see their website. The link will appear in the chat. We have come to the question and answer segment of this event and an opportunity to make inquiries about creating a proclamation suited to your particular location. Joining us is my longtime friend and Thomas Paine expert, Gary Burton. Gary is the president of the Thomas Paine National Historical Association. Also joining us for this segment of the program is Zenos Frudakis. He is a sculptor we have selected to work with as we move forward with the Thomas Paine Washington, D.C. monument plans. And I'll put a link in the chat so you can see all of the marvelous pieces Zenos has created and is now working on in his Glenside, Pennsylvania studio. And I'm going to tell you that Ann Duran had to leave, but Christopher Cameron and Francis Chu are still with us. But most of the previous presenters had other engagements and they send their best regards. Kevin, please tell the audience members how they can send us their questions.
Sure, Margaret. The easiest way is for people to go ahead and type their question in the Q&A tab. I see we already have a few in there, so I'm happy, if you're ready, to go ahead and start with a few of them.
Great.
So good. So a anonymous one was, what is Thomas Paine's description of American exceptionalism?
Gary, would you like to take that?
Yes. I answered this in the chat, I think make America an asylum for mankind. That's an exceptionalism. I mean, that was primary on his mind, that America would be an example. And to make an asylum for humanity, for mankind, means the gates are open. So that's still relevant today, I believe.
Wonderful. And Michael Murphy asks, what's a good biography for Thomas Paine?
I happen to love this book. It's called Thomas Paine, America's Godfather by Woodward. And as you can see, I have a lot of little tabs on this book of all the things I found most interesting. And it actually helped me build my play or presentation as Madame Bonneville to give assemblies to children in that character. I also enjoy Jack Fruckman's book about Thomas Paine. I have it over on the back here. I can't reach it very well, but Gary, what are your favorite books to recommend?
Knowing what I know, I don't have a recommendation really. I would recommend Frances's book because she goes back and finds the historical roots of Paine, which is always enlightening. Paine's biography is going to change dramatically when the collected works comes out. I mean, really dramatically. And we only know the half from the biographies. They only present the half of the full story of Paine, his connections, his impact, right up to the top of the British government. And so everything we think we know about Paine is going to be challenged. And most of the things that we appreciate Paine for are magnified once this collected works comes out. So as far as recommending something as a biography, I like the Williamson book. I forget her first name, Audrey Williamson, goes way back, 60s, because she ties the social fabric around Paine to Paine. And that's very rarely done in a lot of the biographies. And so that's worth reading. It's a good, entertaining read. Otherwise, just sit still and wait for the collected works in a couple of years, and then you'll have a whole new adventure in front of you.
So this is Jack Fruckman's book. It's called Thomas Paine, Apostle of Freedom. And once again, you see all my tabs from reading this. I really do adore this book, and the index is very expansive. So you can look up particular subjects that you're interested in. A lot of the biographies of Thomas Paine fall into a category of false information. There were a lot of untrue rumors spread about Thomas Paine and falsehoods to diminish his reputation. And it was what the National Enquirer does today, making up nonsense stories to sell newspapers. So we have to be very leery of some of these rumors and misinformation that has circulated about Thomas Paine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. So we have a few questions, and I'll try. We had a few different questions regarding the upcoming statue and its unveiling. So people are wondering, has a site been selected in DC for the Paine Monument? When about would it be possibly unveiled? And also some of what the text or about the statue a little bit.
So I'm very happy that Zenos is here. I'm going to have him talk in just a moment, but I'll answer some of those questions. We have a meeting with the National Commission on Monuments on February the 6th. And we will go there to see what their thinking is about what they're going to give us. In the 1994, President Clinton had set aside a large amount of land for us to use. We got the land in 1994, but we didn't have any money. So we lost the land. Part of it was taken by the World War II monument. It's Area 1, and Area 1 has the wonderful address of 1776 Constitution Avenue. So we'd love to see that back. But we're going to be very mindful of what the commissioners have in their perspective of where such a monument should go. So we'll know more after February 6th. And of course, we want to have this done in 4 years so that we can coincide with the Declaration of Independence celebrations. And now Zenos, please say hi to everyone. I see you're working on the Tom Paine statue as we're talking.
Yeah, I am. From time to time, I work on it, and I'm working on a lot of things. And I was reminded of when you came to me some years ago, and we both had an interest in Thomas Paine, but you told me how you had almost had this sculpture project happen. And you knew I had done over 100 big sculptures, and we got together, and now we have this wonderful, august group of people that I'm humbled to be part of. And they said, let's try to do this. So Philadelphia has a vacuum because it doesn't have a sculpture of him, and Washington has a vacuum. By not having a statue to him with all these other statues that are out there, it suggests that he wasn't important. And we know that he was extremely important, that perhaps the country wouldn't have come out the way it did without him. And he's one of those indispensable people. There are few in history. And you were the driving force to begin this, and we didn't know where it would go at the time, and so I tried to make something that was general enough to show the essence of him. Common sense is there in his hand, as you can see it, and the pen is here. He was more of a pen person than a rifle person, and he is still in the works. And I had somebody make a costume for him that was historically accurate, and it's a general enough posture so that it could go anywhere from inside the Capitol to outside, anywhere along the mall. And that's what we had to do at that point, because we're not sure where he's going to end up. He may end up, hopefully not like he was when he was buried with his bones scattered to who knows where, but I think it's just going to be so important to have a place where people can go and exercise their common sense and make speeches and talk in his presence. Maybe, well, we'll see what we can do. We'll make the most of it when the time comes.
Yes, and if we do get land in particular, we can add a desk and
Yes.
we can add benches. And Jamie Raskin has asked us to concentrate on Thomas Paine's words in some way. So we're, talking about would
Sure.
benches have the words on them?
Well,
And I've asked legislators to actually submit what words of Thomas Paine they would cherish at any monumental site. So let's see what they turn in as well.
my thought originally was that because words were so important for him, and is to have words coming away from him, that he would be up on a little bit of a pedestal, and that there would be quotes from each of his major writings, the Crisis and the Rights of Man and so on, not just common sense, so that people could read them and have that, and be educated in what he said. And I also did, as you're stating, think that perhaps there might be his desk. We have examples of his desk behind him, and maybe a chair, and that he's just stood up from writing this, and he's inspired, and he's trying to make things happen. So that's my thought at this point.
Thank you.
And
If there are any
Margaret,
questions,
sorry, go ahead, Gezenos.
no, I just say if there are any questions for me, please ask me.
Wonderful. If we get a few more, I'll be happy to put those in.
Sure.
Margaret, we did have a question from Brian. He says, can you please take a moment to explain who Madame Bonneville was in Paine's life for some people who may not know?
Yes, Madame Bonneville was a very close friend to Thomas Paine through her husband, Nicholas Bonneville. And she and Nicholas invited Thomas Paine to live in their home. He lived with them, and he was an absolute amazing house guest. He would get visitors like Napoleon Bonaparte and different high society people would come to visit Thomas Paine, and she documented a lot of the information about living with Thomas Paine, and it's beautiful writings that she describes what a wonderful person he is, and generous and kind. And she actually left France when her husband was arrested. He was a publisher, and he, of course, wrote highly controversial pieces and published highly controversial pieces. And so she came to America on Thomas Paine's invitation with her sons, and she lived in his home in Bordentown, New Jersey. And he actually left quite a nice will, naming her as the beneficiary and her sons. And Thomas Paine made sure that her sons were educated. And she was given the farm in New Rochelle, which she and her husband eventually moved into. It's a really fun story to hear about. Of course, I told you about those nasty rumors that were going around. And one of the rumors was that Mrs. Bonneville actually gave birth to a son of Thomas Paine, which was pure nonsense and totally so out there that Madame Bonneville actually sued for defamation of character and won. She had, really put up a fight to correct this misinformation going around, and I admire her for that. So look up some more information about Madame Bonneville, and I'm sure you'll find it just as fascinating as I did.
Wonderful. And Peter asked, would Thomas Paine be more prominent in America if it were not for the Age of Reason?
Well, I love the Age of Reason. And, that's one thing that Thomas Paine did. He did not hold back on his opinions. And I talk about the Age of Reason as a deism manifesto, in that, of course, we all know that Thomas Paine was a deist. Nature's God is something that I think we can all agree with, that nature is so beautiful and so unexplainable, and that's where science comes in and helps us with the mystery of nature. And so he, in the Age of Reason, tells us to not listen to people who say that they can talk to God or speak for God or know God. He says that the language of God is only known through nature. So that's why I love the Age of Reason, and I highly recommend it as reading materials. It will make you think. It will make you understand why people beyond Thomas Paine said no gods, no masters, and made sure that we were following reason and not priests or prophets.
Wonderful. John asks, bearing in mind that Paine was a free Quaker and the influence of the Constitution examples set by Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, could it be claimed that the U.S. experiment owes more to the Quakers than to traditional Christianity?
Well, it definitely doesn't owe it to traditional Christianity. It owes its founding on secularism and reason and the Age of Enlightenment. Do you have any comments on that, Gary?
The whole issue of the age of reason is overblown. Every historian in the 19th century, to attack Paine in all their history books, they used that. That's where Teddy Roosevelt got his he's a dirty little atheist. That was the ethos around Paine. However, it doesn't hold water when you examine the details. There were Federalists at the time who had the same religious views as Thomas Paine, and they were never singled out. Paine was primarily singled out for his politics, which was democracy. And in order to defeat him, they took everything they could find, and so they used Age of Reason, and they didn't use it to their fellow political travelers. So it didn't help him, the Age of Reason, but it wasn't his death blow. The death blow was politics of the time, and the rich won out, and they didn't want Paine anywhere near government. So that's my take on it.
And just to add to that as well, and looking at the influence of the Quakers in Pennsylvania in 1776, I think there was about a decade where we sort of followed the influence of Pennsylvania, especially in trying to have a decentralized executive, more of a loose confederation of states, right? And, you know, Pennsylvania's 1776 Constitution was incredibly radical for its time, establishing a unicameral legislature, allowing all men who pay taxes instead of were property owners to vote. But Pennsylvania itself backed away from that fairly quickly. And eventually the United States sort of embraced a governmental model that was actually similar to what we'd had under Great Britain, right? With a stronger executive, taking power away from the legislature, not going with the unicameral legislature. So our federal constitution actually ended up being incredibly similar to that of Massachusetts, which of course was dominated by Protestants and the descendants of Puritans.
Thank you, Christopher. Excellent point. How many more questions do we have in the queue, Kevin?
I've been combining a few, so I have one more that we currently have. I just see another one was added, but so someone was asking a combination of a few questions. So is the Thomas Paine Memorial Group planning to produce any education materials for groups to use? And is there any effort to translate more of Thomas Paine's works into other languages?
Well, we are currently working on a synopsis of Thomas Paine's works, and we're putting it online, and it will be available for free. So we're going to highlight each of his major works with a section of a synopsis of the work, and then the quotations, and even a chapter with his poetry. So we think this is going to be a very enjoyable book for people to go online and discover and enjoy. And I have been working on a Thomas Paine coloring book for children for many, many years. And thank you, Gary, for helping vet that coloring book for us. And I'm hoping to get that published before or around the same time that we have our Thomas Paine monument. So those are the two things I can tell you about. Gary, of course, is involved with the collected works, so we're looking forward to that. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association is not involved in that project, however, but Gary's going to keep us informed about it.
Yeah. We're still editing, and it's going to be a full 2 years from now before we hand it over to the publisher. So that's all we're working on right now.
Well,
the importance of this collected works is not only the results that we're finding, we're doubling the corpus. But it's also the technology we're using that's going to change the way historians approach history. No more guessing, no more, if you read a lot of history books, a lot of it, there's guesswork involved. We're taking the guesswork out of most of this. So it's a very important project.
Gary, I have a question. Is this going to be available to a popular audience?
Popular, no, but it will be digitized. So for very expensive, you'll have access to it. It's very inexpensive, you'll have access to it. But to actually have the 6 volumes or so that it's going to be on your bookshelf, it's going to cost a pretty penny, I assume, these days.
It'll be for the university libraries.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Well, Kevin, do you think we should move on then?
That'll be great. I just wanted, Roger Williams did make one quick note. He said there will be educational materials that are going to be created for the Crossing musical. So just a nice segue for you, Mara.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, if we didn't get to your question, be assured that we'll follow up with you if you provide us with your contact information. So this concludes the question and answer portion of the program. And based on the samples we provided, we hope that many of you are inspired to write a Thomas Paine proclamation for your specific location. And if we can be of further assistance, please contact the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. Our contact information is in the chat and it will appear on the closing slide. If you are successful in your Thomas Paine Day endeavors, please make sure that the Thomas Paine Memorial Association receives a copy of the proclamation and your event details. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association is a nonprofit educational organization and all donations are tax deductible. If you enjoyed this event and would like to help us provide additional educational webinars, if you'd like to help us finance school assemblies, install more memorials to honor Thomas Paine, and help us with other related Thomas Paine projects, please consider donating tonight. A donation link will appear in the chat. And thanks in advance for your financial support. Before we conclude the formal program, we are pleased to present the 3rd song from the new musical, The Crossing. Rights Intrinsic is a song that showcases Thomas Paine's vision for a new world. It is performed by Gavin Esham. John Husa and John Allen Watts, the creators of The Crossing, would like to dedicate this video debut of Rights Intrinsic to Congressman Jamie Raskin as a way of honoring all the patriotic accomplishments he has performed as a legislator. After the song, we will be showing the credit slides. The credit slides are synchronized to the lovely piano music of Christine Magdalenas Jones. She's playing excerpts from Mozart's Sonata number 11. We are very sorry to announce that a social hour is not possible today, but we look forward to possible live events in June of 2023 at various locations, inspired by those of you who write Thomas Paine Day proclamations and arrange for a celebration in your city. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association stands ready to be of assistance for all of your endeavors. On behalf of the board members of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association and the co-sponsors of this event, thank you very much for spending time with us. Goodbye, everybody.
It's not as though we don't all know where injustice lies. We recognize it plain as day, 'tis rote to avert our eyes. And there's no reason our reason can claim, no scorn of morals aside, that natural rights ought not be the same to each of us justly applied. So now commence we to chisel away the sign of our oppression, restoration of rights intrinsic to say a most logical progression. I see a land where everyone is free. I see a land of human dignity. Free.